It was just before midnight on Christmas Day when Professor Ravi Gupta turned off the lights to his second court room in St. John's College and locked the door behind him. The contents of his canvas shopping bag clinked together as he descended the spiral staircase, the worn timber steps creaking under his weight. On the first-floor landing, he caught a hint of coal dust in the air from the hidden bunkers located beneath the leaded window. These supplied the fireplaces in the Fellows' Combination Room, the magnificent 16th-century long room, where he and his colleagues had taken lunch on Christmas Eve. The Fellowship's final gathering of the year had been a convivial affair, made all the more enjoyable by the presence of Aurelia. The Portuguese waitress had been serving him meals for almost 30 years, and though their relationship had never blossomed beyond menu choices, Ravi had long hoped that it might. So when, at the end of lunch, Aurelia had wished him a Merry Christmas, the sudden surge of joy had left him flustered. By the time he'd mastered his emotions and turned to wish her the same, the waitress was already heading back to the butler's pantry with his plate. Even now, a day later, he felt deflated at that missed opportunity. His one chance to engage her in conversation before the festive break, and he'd messed it up, as he had done so many times over the years. "You old fool," he said, as he descended the final set of steps and slid his rickety wooden room indicator to out. Ravi paused in the relative shelter of the stairwell's archway to look out across Second Court. The latest cold front had brought with it the first heavy snowfall of winter. A smooth white blanket now lay across the immaculate lawns, save for a couple of mounds where the snow had drifted against the "keep off the grass" signs. Not that these prohibitions served any useful purpose today, he reflected. The students and tourists were long gone. Except for him, the college was deserted. Well, almost, he thought with a smile. Adjusting the faded college scarf his friend Robert had given him all those years ago, Ravi set off for his last errand of the day. Though a far cry from the ice-covered slopes of his native Nepal, the frozen cobbles underfoot were treacherous, and he trod with great care. It wasn't until he reached the gritted path that the going became easier. Ravi turned into a covered passageway and emerged into Chapel Court, where the windows of the college library lay in darkness for once. Instead, the pretty little square was illuminated by fairy lights hung from the trees on the far side of the court. Their pale blue glow added a magical touch to the academic heart of the college, and his spirits lifted, if only for a moment. His eye was drawn to paving slabs in front of the library entrance. Memories of that night at the start of term came flooding back, when something far heavier than snow had fallen from the chapel tower. The wounded harpy, diving to save its precious egg, had smashed into the flagstones. The impact had sent an explosion of calcified remains into the air that had clung to the tower's walls like a funeral shroud. Though the subsequent storm had washed any lingering trace of the creature away, the crater had taken the college's maintenance department days to repair. For Ravi, no amount of new stonework could erase the memory of that final, keening screech. Even now, as he stared at the tower rising up into the night sky, he felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Bad memories?" The voice made him spin around, the bottles in his bag clinking as his hand reached inside his jacket pocket. Framed in the passageway stood a squat, gowned figure. How the person had come within a few paces of him without making a sound, he could not fathom. But when Ravi saw the impish smile on the man's face, he understood. "Master," he said, "you startled me." "Forgive me, Ravi," said Dominic Lester, Master of St. John's and former senior intelligence officer at MI5. "I was just on my way back from the neighbours after dropping off a present." He waved towards the distant spires of Trinity College. "A bottle of college port for my opposite number, to make sure she had something decent to drink over Christmas." Very neighbourly of you, said Ravi. Trinity's well-stocked wine cellar was almost as legendary as its endowment. Well, it is the season of goodwill, after all, said Lester, stepping out of the passageway and staring up at the chapel tower. The peregrine falcons are still around, then? Ravi remembered that a pair had been seen hunting from the gargoyles. I believe so, he said. You're something of an authority on raptors, of course, said Lester, continuing to stare skywards. Ravi shot him a look. The master was well aware of what had happened earlier that term with the creature. Indeed, there was little the man didn't know about what went on in college, but Lester had still not forgiven Ravi for taking matters into his own hands and destroying the harpy, nor for involving the students who had first discovered it. Still, as master, he had done his best to cover things up, laying the blame on corroding Victorian ironwork for the damage to the chapel rampart. He had then commissioned the domestic bursar to conduct a full structural survey to keep the press and insurers on side. But Ravi's role in the incident had put a strain on their relationship, and he could hear the edge in Lester's voice. It is protected, isn't it, Ravi? The bird of prey, you mean, Master? Their eyes met, and they both knew he was referring to the portal. I believe so, yes, Ravi confirmed, remembering Robert's assurance that it had been sealed. That's good to know, said Lester. Then the smile was back. I must say the falcons have been doing a marvellous job of keeping the pigeon population under control. I've hardly seen any on the lawns recently. I'm sure the gardeners are delighted. Lester snorted. Well, mind how you go, Ravi. These courts can be lethal. Thank you for your concern, Master. Merry Christmas. Ravi waited until the former spy had disappeared through the far passageway leading to the Master's lodge. With a final glance at the tower, he made for the shelter of the chapel cloister. Ahead of him, he could see lights glowing in the forecourt lodge. If he was lucky, Bert, the head porter, would be there with some of his wife's excellent mince pies. Besides, he was in no rush. There was no one waiting for him at home in his terraced house in Newnham. As he approached the lodge, Ravi was pleased to see a familiar figure standing under the clock. Pushing the door open, he held up the clinking bag. Merry Christmas, Bert. Outside in Chapel Court, the wind whipped up the snow, sending ghost-like flurries dancing across the lawn before settling back onto the shifting surface of white. Far above, on an outcrop of stone, a pair of sharp eyes peered down at the scene. The falcon tensed, spotting movement in the air. A bat flittered out from the eaves of the tower, its black outline visible against the white lawn. The peregrine flexed its wings to dislodge the icy flakes that had collected during the long minutes it had sat motionless on the gargoyle's back. Then it sprang from the lofty perch and dived for its prey. A heartbeat later, a grey hand reached out and plucked the bird from the air. The falcon screeched in alarm, but cold fingers clamped over its beak, silencing the cry. The hand tightened, crushing the life from the creature. The bird's wings continued to flap until, with a sickening crunch, they lay still. The hooded head leaned over the lifeless body, bending down so that the cowl almost touched the feathers jutting from between its fingers. Barely audible over the whistling of the wind, it sniffed its catch. Moments later, the Trinity clock began striking 12 o'clock, and, unobserved by anyone, the last festive bird of the day was consumed.